And with great pleasure, I would like to introduce our phenomenal speaker, Tonya Wiley. And she has been conducting conservation biology studies on sawfish since 2001. And this includes research on the endangered small-tooth sawfish in Florida for nearly a decade. Tonya was a researcher with Mote Marine Laboratory Center for Shark Research, directing field surveys for smalltooth sawfish from Tampa Bay to the Florida Keys. She is an appointed member of and team leader for the National Marine Fisheries Service Smalltooth Sawfish Recovery Implementation Team, which is a panel of experts working to protect the remaining sawfish population in the United States and to prevent that species from extinction. Tonya is the president of Havenworth Coastal Conservation, which was founded to promote the sustainable use and conservation of marine resources through research, outreach, and education. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Tonya.
Hi, everybody. Oh, Nicole, thank you for the introduction, and thanks for hosting us today. And thanks to everybody who showed up to spend your lunch with me to learn about the endangered sawfish that we have here in Florida. So this talk, I'm going to focus quite a bit on the Indian River Lagoon since most of our attendees are from over there, but it's also going to be broad enough for everyone, no matter where you're attending from. So we're here to talk about sawfish, and sawfish is a very large, distinctive type of ray. They have a shark-like body, but you can see how they get their name, right? They have this elongated saw, or what we call rostrum, on the front. There's 5 species of sawfish found around the world, and historically, we used to have 2 species here in the United States. And at one time, both of those species were considered very common and abundant, including in the Indian River Lagoon system. So these are what's not a sawfish. These are things that we often get confused with sawfish. So all of these species here on the left are bony fish. They have a skeleton made out of bone instead of cartilage like the sawfish. These also have 1 gill opening on the side. So swordfish, paddlefish, needlefish, and gar, these are all bony fish with 1 gill opening on the side. Saw shark look very similar to the sawfish, but a saw shark has the 5 gill slits on the side of the body. That's what makes this one a saw shark, whereas the sawfish has the gill slits on the underside of the body, and that makes the sawfish array. And they're not called sawtooth sharks. Sawtooth is actually a mountain range out in Idaho, not an animal that swims in our ocean. So I mentioned that we used to have 2 species, and here's a side-by-side comparison of the 2 species. On the left is the small-tooth sawfish, Pristis pectinata, and on the right, the large-tooth sawfish, Pristis pristis. The easiest way to tell the 2 apart is by the number of teeth on the saw. So these aren't real teeth like in our mouth, but these are actually modified scales. And these teeth on the rostrum grow continuously throughout the life of the animal. So it's very similar to our fingernails. They'll grow, they'll chip, they'll break, but as long as the animal doesn't lose this pulp cavity in here where the teeth is formed, that will just continue to grow through the life of the animal, just like our fingernails. So the small-tooth sawfish has 22 to 29 teeth on either side of the rostrum. And that number is actually set during development when it's an embryo, and the number of teeth that they have on the rostrum when they're born is the number of teeth that they'll have their whole life. And that can actually vary by as much as 3. So one animal might have 25 on one side and 27 on the other. Another animal would have 24 on one side, 26 on the other. So that's one way we can identify different individuals when we catch several sawfish together. The large-tooth sawfish, on the other hand, has 16 to 20 teeth on either side of the rostrum. And there's some other differences with like the shape of the rostrum. Here on the small-tooth sawfish, you can see it's almost as wide at the base as it is at the tip. Or here on the large-tooth sawfish, it's almost twice as wide at the base as it is at the tip. And there's some other differences with fin placement. Here's the dorsal fin on the small tooth is very far back here over the pelvic fins, On the large tooth, it's much more forward on the body, up here between the pectorals and the pelvic fins. But again, the easiest way to tell them apart is by the number of teeth on the rostrum or saw. So here's historically where these two species used to be found. Again, on the left is the small-tooth sawfish, on the right is the large-tooth sawfish. And in red is where we know that that species historically was found. So here in the United States, the small-tooth sawfish, we had it in the Gulf of Mexico from Texas over here to Florida and up the mid-Atlantic, as far as North Carolina. We even had one animal landed in New York. We don't know where it was caught, but it was landed in New York. Only this species was not in the Pacific. We only had that one here in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. On the other hand, the large-tooth sawfish, that one was in the Pacific and the Atlantic, and only found in the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't have the large-tooth sawfish in the Atlantic. So the small-tooth sawfish was always more common east of the Mississippi River, always more common Florida area. The large-tooth sawfish, on the other hand, was much more common west of the Mississippi River, predominantly had records from this one in Texas. So I wanted to show you some of these old photographs that just show you just how common sawfish used to be and how big they can get historically. So when I started the project back 20 years ago, we didn't have literature to go to find out how to catch sawfish. So I actually went to the library and dug up a lot of old records from magazines and newspapers and talked to fishermen. So I wanted to share with you some of these really cool photographs that we dug up from around the state of Florida. This is St. Petersburg. I'm in Tampa Bay, so this is near me. This is one of the original iterations of the St. Pete Pier that was just rebuilt. Here's a newspaper article of a 14-foot, 6-inch sawfish here in St. Petersburg. Moving down the coast to Venice, just south of Charlotte Harbor, Peace River, which is in Charlotte Harbor. And Naples Pier is an area that we continue today to get a lot of reports of large sawfish. And here's a really great photograph of 4 very big sawfish. So here is the man standing here. And here's where the sawfish starts and goes all the way up to here. And there's 4 of these large sawfish. Here's a tarpon that's probably a really good size tarpon because they hung it up to take a photograph of it, but it looks very tiny compared to these huge sawfish. A couple spotted eco rays down here on the floor as well. But so moving over to your coast now, St. Lucie River from the early 1900s. Here's a great photograph, all these very dressed up gentlemen here in the background. Daytona Beach, here's a sawfish that was already missing its saw. Here's one from the PP Cobb Dock, which later became the Cobb General Store in Fort Pierce, which unfortunately closed last year. But just to give you an idea of the location, here's 2 sawfish that are over these railroad tracks here. And these 2 really great ones from Indian River. This is from the 1920s in Crane Creek. This large sawfish hanging up in a tree here. And this is from an old book, 1800s book that says Aquatic Sports in Florida, Spearing Sawfish in the Indian River. So not very anatomically correct here, but you can see apparently it was a very common sport for people to go out and spearfish sawfish in the Indian River Lagoon at one time. So it shows just how common they would have been back then. A couple other great ones from Indian River Lagoon, this one being trucked through town here on this flatbed, and 3 large sawfish from Sewell's Point in the 1960s. And then down the coast a little bit, another one from West Palm here from Miami, and then down into Key West, here's a photograph of a little kid who was selling Sawfish Rostrum to tourists at a fish camp. You go down to the Keys now and you go into Shell World and you can buy any kind of shell or sand dollar you want at any of those little souvenir places. But back in the day, people used to buy Sawfish Rostrum as souvenirs to their vacation in the Keys. A couple of these this is an old postcard that we found. This shows here 2 fully formed baby sawfish here. So that was really our first clue that the sawfish here in the United States are giving birth to these fully formed live young. And this photograph was a gold mine. This is from Melbourne in 1912. This photograph, the mom is so big here that the saw is not even in the photograph, but there's 11 baby sawfish here that, presumably they either cut out of the mom or she dropped while being caught, but 11 baby sawfish here. So that photograph really gave us a lot of information that is how many young sawfish have here in the United States, what we call their litter size. So the photograph on the left, this one here really kind of sums up the good and the bad in the history of sawfish here in the United States. So this is a picture from the Florida Keys in the 1940s. Again, fishermen in these fancy three-piece wool suits. We are very spoiled now to going out in our Columbia, wicking gear, but man, they really used to dress up to go fishing back then. But on this side of the boat, we were able to count 30 sawfish. So here's the biggest one starting here, coming down here, and then there's several babies that are hanging up here. So it shows how common, who knows what's on the other side of the boat or how many that they've already removed from the boat. But, sawfish were so common that they were able to go out and in one day catch at least these 30 sawfish that we're able to count. But unfortunately, they kept that many sawfish in one day as well. So it was good that they were that plentiful. They were so easy to catch that they kept that many, but they unfortunately did keep that many. They removed that many from the population in one day. On the right, this is our Florida state record sawfish. This is a small-tooth sawfish that was caught in Florida Bay in 1961. So it is 15 feet 4 inches. We have records of longer sawfish, but those of you who are fishermen know that records are done by weight. So this is the largest sawfish that we have had officially weighed, and it was 648 pounds. And that one will probably forever stand as our Florida state record sawfish from, 70 years ago now. Crazy, 60 years ago. So the large tooth sawfish, this is the one that was always more common west of the Mississippi River, that we had much more common in Texas. And here's an old newspaper clipping from Galveston. Here's the fishermen here, and these are both large tooth sawfish with the 16 to 20 rostrum teeth. This species was very common in the early 1900s. We know from logbooks of fishermen and all of these photographs that they were very common in the early 1900s. But already by the 1950s, we were seeing this species be severely depleted. And the last confirmed record we have of a large tooth sawfish in Florida was in 1943. And the last one we have in all of the United States was in Texas in 1961. So unfortunately, it's been 60 years since we've had a document of this species in the United States. The small tooth sawfish doing a little better. So I mentioned when we started this research that there hadn't been any directed field studies done on them, so we didn't have the scientific literature to refer to. So that's when we went to all those logbooks and newspapers and magazines and dug up all these records we could of sawfish. And we made these maps. So each one of these yellow dots is where we have a confirmed record of a sawfish. And this goes all the way back to 1782, almost 3,500 records we have here. And that shows you that we had records from, this is the Texas-Mexico border, through the Gulf of Mexico, over here to peninsular Florida, and up here is even that one that was landed in New York. But what I want to point out is this red area here. This red area is where over half of the records came from. So of these 3,500 records, half of them are in this red area, which is basically Charlotte Harbor through the 10,000 Islands, Everglades National Park, and the Florida Keys area. But for you over in the Indian River Lagoon and me here in Tampa Bay, I want to show you this darker blue area. This is where 90% of all of these records are. So you can see peninsular Florida is where historically 90% of the records were coming from of this species. And the majority of Indian River Lagoon, when we go back in time to 1782, is in this dark blue area here. Same with me over here in Tampa Bay. But then when we fast forward, now we're only looking at records from 1964 on. So this is when we've already lost the large tooth sawfish. And now you can see for small tooth sawfish, we've completely lost them from the Atlantic seaboard north of Florida, barely kind of hanging over here in the middle Texas coast. But this blue area where 90% of their records are has shrunk. So you can see here now, this is Cape Canaveral here. This blue area has contracted and is now even less of the Florida peninsular coast. And even this little red area has shrunk a little bit, but still half of the records are coming from South Florida, focusing around 10,000 Islands and Everglades National Park. Now we look at records, this is only from 1990 on. We don't have the species anymore over here in the Western Gulf of Mexico, a couple up here in the Florida Panhandle, but for the most part, records are now restricted to the southern half of the Florida Peninsula. You see here, even this blue area where 90% of the records has even contracted even further, and the red area has gotten even smaller. So historically, we know Indian River Lagoon was important for small-tooth sawfish. We can see that from these maps. And you know, now, unfortunately, like me here in Tampa Bay, Indian River Lagoon is really at the far northern extent of their current range. And so we have a few reasons, you know, how we completely lost one species of sawfish altogether, and the other species is kind of on, you know, the brink. We've had to declare it an endangered species. How is that possible that we can do that to these two species? Well, there's really these three main reasons. Fishing mortality, they were a directed great sport fish, as you can tell from those photographs that I showed you of fishermen, you know, with their catch, but also bycatch and shrimp trawls and gill nets. And you know, we humans really started mass fishing with nets in the mid-1900s, which kind of coincides with the decline of the sawfish species. They're so easily tangled in nets because of that toothed rostrum that they have. It's great for us researchers. We can catch them pretty quickly in a net. You know, but the net is the livelihood for a lot of fishermen, so they would not cut the net to remove the sawfish from the net. Instead, they would kill the sawfish, remove it from the net, and then oftentimes keep the saw as a trophy and discard the body. But also loss of inshore nursery habitat, like so many animals. Baby sawfish rely on inshore areas around red mangrove habitat, shallow areas. I'm going to go into this a little more in a bit. And of course, we've developed a lot of that shoreline, particularly here in Florida. You know, we've ripped out mangrove shorelines, we've built beaches, we've built seawalls, we've built condos. And so a lot of the nursery habitat that young sawfish need to survive and to grow, we have unfortunately destroyed. But you know, that area of 10,000 Islands and Everglades National Park remains this vast expanse of natural habitat. And I think that's why the population was always focused and centered in that area. Small-tooth sawfish also have low reproductive capacity. And what I mean by that is, as opposed to a bony fish like a trout or a redfish that'll spawn thousands of eggs, as I mentioned, the small-tooth sawfish give live birth to very few young. They have about 7 to 12 young pups per litter. And so, you know, there one picture of at least 30 sawfish being caught on that one boat. We were just taking more sawfish out of the population than they were able to put back in. You know, we withdrew the bank account on sawfish. They just couldn't keep up with the amount of sawfish that we were taking out of the population because they give birth to so few young. So there were a lot of uses for sawfish back in the day. Aquarium trade was a big one. Here in the US, the trade for aquariums of live sawfish oftentimes went through Key West, what's now the aquarium there in Key West. And for a long time, they had a sawfish at the Key West Aquarium that you could actually pay to feed. That was pretty cool if anybody ever got a chance to see that. There are 2 sawfish at SeaWorld in Orlando. Those are the closest ones for any of us to go see. There's some at the Atlanta Aquarium, the Downtown Aquarium in Houston, and about a dozen facilities in the United States have sawfish on display for us to enjoy. Again, the closest ones to us here are SeaWorld in Orlando. Their fins, like sharks, their fins are used in shark fin soup, and the fins of sawfish are very highly prized for shark fin soup because they're considered white fins, which is like the texture of the fins themselves. And here's an example of a tail fin, a caudal fin from a sawfish that was confiscated in trade in Indonesia that was on its way to the shark fin soup market. The rostra, the saws, are used for curios, trophies. As I mentioned, fishermen a lot of times would cut the saw off, keep that as a trophy of their catch, display it on the wall, or people would buy Sawfish Rostrum as trinkets and memories of their down to the Keys or Orlando. And so we still occasionally will see these hanging on walls somewhere. If you go to a restaurant, or especially down in the Keys, you may see a Sawfish Rostra hanging on the wall as decoration. They're also sold in Asia in pharmacies. They're ground up to make the base of medicines. They're used as ceremonial weapons. So here's an example of a Sawfish Rostrum with a handle affixed to it to use as a ceremonial weapons. And one of the more unique uses is the teeth on the rostrum are used in the cockfighting industry down in Central and South America. So they'll take the tooth off the rostrum and slice it in half long ways, and they'll put this little casing here on it and use that to affix it to the legs of the roosters, creates artificial spurs for cockfighting. So there have been some NGOs that have tried to develop some artificial materials of these to use in the cockfighting industry, but the industry likes the Sawfish Rostra teeth to use as these artificial spurs, unfortunately. Historically, their skin was used to make leather, their meat was used for food or bait, and the oil from their liver was used in lamps. So in response to that population decline of losing one species altogether and the other one kind of hanging on in South Florida, the state of Florida was actually proactive and the first to respond to that and protected both species of sawfish from harvest in 1992. I added the gillnet ban, the 1995 Florida inshore gillnet ban here. That was not done for sawfish, didn't have anything to do with sawfish, but definitely has played a part in the fact that we still have sawfish around. And that is something we definitely need to keep in place to save sawfish, because that's one of the greatest sources of mortality. Those inshore gillnets, as you can imagine, sawfish are very easily caught in those gillnets. So in 1999, NOAA Fisheries received a petition to list both species of sawfish as endangered. That's when I came on and we started this status review, digging through all the records, trying to find out all we could about the species in the United States. And in 2003, we listed the smalltooth sawfish as an endangered species. It was the first shark listed on the ESA. In 2009, we published our recovery plan. That's a document that lays out everything that we need to do to save the sawfish that are left, but also to recover the population to the point they don't need protection anymore, which is really our ultimate goal. We want the population to expand back outside of South Florida, find them again in some of these areas where historically they were populated. We want them to recover. We want the population to expand. We want to be able to remove them from the endangered species list. And that document lays out everything we need to do in order for that to happen, which is, we need people to let them go when they catch them, and we need to preserve the nursery habitats for the young. In 2013, all 5 species of sawfish got protection on CITES, which is the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. And that limits or bans the sale and trade of sawfish and sawfish parts from one country to another. In 2014, we also went ahead and added the large tooth sawfish to the Endangered Species Act, just in case there's one out there. Any sawfish in the United States are protected by the ESA. We also in 2009 designated critical habitat for juvenile sawfish, and that doesn't create a closed area or mark off an area that you're not allowed access to. But what it does is ensure that any projects that are either funded by or permitted by a federal agency have to be reviewed to make sure that they're not destroying critical sawfish habitat. And so we had to figure out what the features of the habitat are that are so important to sawfish. And here's a little baby sawfish here in Everglades National Park in Chokoloskee swimming here. But we had to figure out what those features are that we needed to protect in case they needed any special management consideration or protection through the critical habitat designation. So there's two areas that we designated critical habitat for juvenile sawfish, less than 200 centimeters. These are areas that provide nursery functions. So here is a sawfish in the mouth of a bull shark. A fisherman caught this bull shark down in Everglades National Park, and it had swallowed this juvenile sawfish. So we know these areas here, Charlotte Harbor and 10,000 Islands, Everglades National Park, are areas where we routinely get newborn sawfish. And those nursery areas provide a lot of food, but also provide protection from predators so that those baby sawfish can grow, to be larger juveniles than adults. And so the features that we determined were important for juvenile sawfish are euryhaline environments. So that's where it's not full strength seawater and it's not fresh water, but it's where the tidal water from the Gulf or the Atlantic meet fresh water flowing in from rivers or streams. So it's usually in backwaters and bays, estuaries, or around river mouths. So it's areas where the salinity can fluctuate with the tide and the freshwater flow coming in. They're mostly found in waters less than 3 feet deep, and most of the time they're in ankle deep water, right up along a red mangrove shoreline here. A lot of times we'll actually even see baby sawfish go up in the red mangrove crop roots, sit amongst the red mangrove crop roots to avoid the sharks that are swimming by. So here's a great video taken by Save Our Seas Foundation by Michael Scholl down in the 10,000 Islands. So here is a little baby sawfish here, super flat area and along the red mangrove shoreline here. Look how cute he is, that little baby sawfish. But these little baby sawfish will just swim back and forth along this shallow area, waiting for the water to go up, into the mangrove so they can actually go up and sit, like I said, among these red mangrove prop roots or under this mangrove overhang here. Because down here in the deeper water are those bull sharks that are swimming by, ready to make a meal out of these little baby sawfish. Look how cute that guy is. Oh, so cute. So cute. Here we're going to see two here in just a second. Yes, here we go. All right, so here are two little sawfish right here. And you can see here it's low tide. So they're out here in this ankle deep water. But as the tide comes in and as this water actually goes up in the mangroves, they are going to swim up here. They're going to follow that ankle deep water up here as the tide comes in and follow it back down. Just do that over and over again, to avoid the things that are swimming in the deeper water that want to eat them. I'll let you just watch that for a second. Such great video. So there's several of us that are doing field research on the sawfish, trying to catch them here in Florida. This is me in the Tampa Bay area. And breaking news, I haven't even had a chance to add it to my presentation yet, but just last Friday and yesterday, we're able to finally tag the first two sawfish in Tampa Bay. So now we have a couple sawfish in Tampa Bay swimming around with some tracking tags on them. This is Charlotte Harbor. This project is run by FWC, led by Greg Polakis and Rachel Scher. Down in the 10,000 Islands and Everglades National Park, the juvenile survey is run by NOAA, John Carlson, and Andrea Kretz. And the adult workforce in the Florida Keys and going up the Atlantic coast is run by Dean Grubbs at Florida State University. And although they don't have a directed project on sawfish, the guys, Matt McAllister, Matt Ajamian and Mike McAllister are opportunistically able to tag some sawfish for us. So you may have seen since September, they've been able to tag 3 sawfish over in the St. Lucie River. You may have seen some reports in the newspaper, or you can go to the FAU news desk here and read an article about it. But thankfully, they have been able to tag some sawfish over that way for us and starting to get some good data from the sawfish over in the Indian River Lagoon. They've been able to tag 2 juvenile sawfish and 1 adult sawfish. And here's their Twitter and their Facebook that you can follow them to get updates on the sawfish work that they're doing specifically over there in your area. So when we catch a sawfish, of course, first we're very excited that we finally caught an endangered species. It's hard for us too, even though we're trying to find them, but we take a bunch of measurements. We measure the saw length or the rostrum length compared to several overall lengths of the body. And we found in the United States that the rostrum is about 20 to 25% of the overall length of the body. It's usually right around 23%. We determine if it's a male or female, and we can tell that externally because male sharks and rays have external organs called claspers. This is what used for mating. So we can just flip them over and see if they're a male or female. Of course, we put a lot of tags on them and in them for tracking and identifying them, which I don't have time to go in and explain all of the different tags that we use, but we do, we've tried to use some satellite tracking tags. We use the tags that are identifying like the microchip that you put in your pet. And then external tags for identifying individuals and internal transmitters, which allow us to track these sawfish long-term through the collaborative iTag and FACT networks of acoustic receivers that are moored in the water. We're starting to get some really, really good information, long-term movement information of sawfish from those tags. We take tooth counts left and right. As I mentioned, small-tooth sawfish in the US have 22 to 29 teeth on either side of the rostrum, can vary by as much as 3. We take a bunch of samples from them, take a blood draw, a fin clip, a little piece of the dorsal fin about the size of our pinky fingernail. We send that off to our colleague, Kevin Feldheim in Chicago. He's doing our family tree of sawfish for us, like our ancestry DNA, building this beautiful family tree of sawfish for us. So when we catch multiple sawfish together, he's able to tell us if they're full siblings or half siblings or how related they are, all from this little piece of fin that we send them. It's amazing. We'll collect samples like parasites and feces, and sometimes we'll take an ultrasound on a large sawfish to see if she's pregnant or if there's anything in the belly. And with that, I need to do a shout out to the biology class at Surrey Community College who's joining us today, and their instructor, Chelsea Shields, who actually developed the protocols that we use still today for ultrasounding of large sawfish. So hi guys, thanks for joining us for class today. So we have a lot of partners that we send samples to that are working on various parts of our sawfish research, really here in the United States and around the world. So many of us working on this now to conserve the species we have here and the 5 species around the world. Our recovery implementation team, I've mentioned a lot of these people already, but this is the team that was formed to take that recovery plan and implement, make sure that the priorities that we set out to recover the population are being done. And the team is led by Adam Brame. He's our US Sawfish Recovery Coordinator with NOAA Fisheries. And if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the team website at sawfishrecovery.org or follow the team on social media at Social Recovery or Sawfish Recovery. A lot of people that are doing policy outreach, conservation, trying to get sawfish protections in other countries around the world, limiting the trade protections, things like that. And one of them in particular that I want to point out is the Sawfish Conservation Society. They have an open Facebook page that anybody can go join if you're interested. So all of us that are doing research on sawfish, policy on outreach, management conservation from around the world. We have researchers from Australia, South America, All of us doing research on the United States or on sawfish will post in that open Facebook group. So it's a really fascinating, fun group, and we'll have fishermen and divers, they'll post in there too when they see sawfish, or when someone finds a sawfish product for sale somewhere, like a shirt or something, we'll all have to go by. So it's a fun group. I recommend you join that if you want to learn more about sawfish. And one of the programs of the Sawfish Conservation Society is the Theosol Project, where we are collecting genetic samples from isolated rostra. So I mentioned that people would buy sawfish rostra as souvenirs or keep them as a trophy. And so if you ever see a sawfish rostra in a museum or a restaurant, tackle shop, or your friend's house, we would like to get a genetic sample from it so we can actually send you a kit where you can take a scraping of the rostra right here where it was removed from the body. And we can get some really valuable information from that. So if you ever see one, let us know and we'll get a kit sent out to you. So what we've learned about sawfish in the United States since we've been doing the research the last 20 years, we know they're born about 2 feet long. It takes about 7 years to reach sexual maturity before they even start reproducing, and they have to be about 11 or 12 feet long for that to happen. So it's almost full size because they get to be about 16 feet long now, but they have to be 11 or 12 feet long before they start reproducing and start putting pups back into the population. We don't know how long they live yet. Our research is only 20 years old. And we don't know how many there are in the population yet. We're trying to get at that answer with that genetic sample that we send off. We think they're pregnant for about a year and give birth to about 7 to 14 of these fully formed little baby sawfish. And we know they feed mostly on fish. But what's interesting is that during development, when these 7 to 14 embryos are developing in mom and during birth, the saw, you can see it here, these teeth are encapsulated in what we call a sheath. It's like this thick gelatinous substance that covers these teeth on the rostrum. So that protects the babies from each other and protects mom while she's got these babies in her, and protects mom during birth so that these, she's not shredded by these teeth during birth. That sheath will actually dissolve off in a few days, and the sawfish can then go about using their saw to find their food. And I have a great video here, thanks to Barbara Warringer, of sawfish using that saw to feed. Look how quickly they can swipe that at a fish in the water column, or they'll use that saw to pin down a fish on the substrate and then go and just suck it in whole. The teeth in the mouth of a sawfish are not sharp. They're like our back teeth, just a flat plate of teeth in the mouth, like a stingray or a cow nose ray. So they use that saw to pin down their prey, to stun or impale fish. So they'll often feed on schooling fish like ladyfish, jack, mullet, things like that, and use that saw to swipe at the schooling fish and then pin it down like this to eat it. Quite fascinating, amazing video that Barbara got there. So our current priorities now for the sawfish that are left in the United States is law enforcement and figuring out critical habitat for adults. So we still have a problem with people cutting the saw off of sawfish. They need that saw to find their food. So when they lose their saw, they likely will starve to death because they don't have a way to find and manipulate the food to eat it anymore. But we know this is still a problem. Here's a case from Jacksonville of a shrimper who received 2 years probation, 80 hours of community service, and a $2,000 fine for killing a sawfish. Was caught in a shrimp trawl. Killed the sawfish to get it out of the net. Here's an example. This is from Tampa Bay. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office was doing a search of a commercial vessel and found this sawfish rostra here, and the crew admitted to being down in the Keys and collected this sawfish rostrum. So we know it's still a problem that people are killing sawfish, keeping the saw, the trophy. We don't know if there are any areas that we need to protect for adults. We have the nursery areas protected for juveniles, but Are there mating areas, feeding areas? Are there corridors that they use for migrating? We don't know. A lot of divers on your coast over there are seeing, congregations of sawfish when they're diving. We don't know what those congregations are for. If they're meeting there to mate, if they're meeting there to rest after mating or giving birth, we don't know. So there's still a lot we need to learn about the adults and their habitat use. So we're doing a lot of outreach and education, focusing on trying to minimize the threats to sawfish from humans, trying to get it to where if a sawfish interacts with a human, it will survive that experience. Here's an unfortunate case down in Everglades National Park last year, where several sawfish were found dead. Many of them had their saws removed. Very clearly an intentional case of people catching and killing sawfish. Divers saw this one wrapped up in a piece of gill net. It was on the bottom, decaying. Again, these interacted with fisheries and were kept and killed. And mishandling by anglers and disturbance of sawfish by divers are the two main threats we're seeing right now. So a lot of our outreach is focusing on that. A lot of the materials that we're developing are for safe handling by anglers and safe viewing by divers. So we've developed a lot of materials that if we were meeting in person, I'd give you a lot of swag. But for safe handling and release guidelines, we want people to enjoy seeing a sawfish, but leave it in the water so that the sawfish can continue to breathe. Don't use gaffs or rope to secure it. Don't drag it up on the beach. Because sawfish are a ray, their gill slits are on the underside. When they're dragged up on the beach, that's just filling their gills with rocks and sand and leaves and debris. So, don't tow it, don't drag it up somewhere, leave it in the water and, just cut the line as close to the hook as possible. That's safety for you and the sawfish. If that sawfish is going to be thrashing around, you don't want to be on the receiving end of the rostrum when it's thrashing around. We're also developing materials for divers. Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous of all these people who are getting these beautiful photographs of sawfish off your coast over there. But unfortunately, we're seeing videos and hearing stories of people who are going down and laying on sawfish or trying to ride sawfish, or they're going down trying to feed them. They're chasing them. They're disturbing them and continuing to chase them. So we need divers to enjoy the experience, but don't chase them or feed them. Try not to disturb them. If a sawfish is changing its behavior or moving because of your presence, then you're too close to it. So try to stay far enough away from it where the sawfish continues to go about his normal activities. Normally, we've got stickers and dive mask strap covers that we're handing out. But we're also hanging up signs at boat ramps and marinas and fishing piers, in dive shops and tackle stores. All these have the angler guidance and diver guidance, how to safely and legally interact with a sawfish if you are fortunate enough to see one. So you may see some of these signs out and about, or if you know of somewhere that would be a good place for us to put one, send me an email and let me know. We've got rack cards that we've developed that we're putting in places that have rack cards display that also have, sawfish background on them, but the angler and diver interaction guidance is on them. And of course, all of our materials have a phone number and a website. We ask people to let us know when they are lucky enough to catch or see a sawfish. You can go to our website, Sawfish Recovery, and fill out a form and share the information with us. You can call our toll-free number. You can also email us or report your sawfish encounter through the FWC Reporter app. But these help us target our field surveys. So the 2 sawfish that I just tagged in Tampa Bay the last couple of days were a direct result of people calling in and saying, I see a sawfish right here. And we responded to it and we're able to go there and tag these animals. So the information that we get to the public from the public is huge for that. Helps us target our surveys, helps us monitor the population. As we expect the population to start spreading out and returning to some of these areas like the Indian River Lagoon where they used to be found, so many more eyes on the water with fishermen and divers looking for sawfish for us. Those reports help us monitor the population as we start to see it expand, and helps us know if the regulations and the management we have in place are working. So all that information that we get from the public really is key to the success of our research. So I write a monthly sawfish news article that comes out in a lot of different papers and magazines, like the Mullet Wrapper and Everglades City, their newspaper, the Coastal Angler Treasure Coast edition of Coastal Angler magazine. It's in several email newsletters as well, like the Fishing Wire and the Florida Guides Association newsletter. But if you know of any magazines or newspapers or email newsletters that might benefit or might like to run the Sawfish news article, let me know. Again, that's a monthly article that we write. October 17th is International Sawfish Day. We are hoping that 2021 can go back to normal. Of course, like everything, we lost 2020 International Sawfish Day and did it largely online, but usually we'll have booths set up at different facilities around the world. And aquariums and schools and all kinds of organizations will celebrate sawfish, and on social media you can follow International Sawfish Day to learn about sawfish and all the research that's going on that day. So the future outlook, large tooth sawfish, unfortunately we have likely lost that species. We consider that one locally extinct. We haven't had a report of that one for 60 years now. So but the small tooth sawfish is doing better. We actually expect that we can recover that species. Recovery is the process of restoring the population to the point where it no longer needs the protections of the ESA. And we're cautiously optimistic that we can actually do that with the small tooth sawfish and see it return to some of these areas again. We're starting to see some encouraging signs of that with the population starting to move out, and we're seeing them here in Tampa Bay and Indian River Lagoon again, for example. But we've got to keep the inshore gillnet ban, which was a great source of mortality for sawfish, and we have to save Everglades National Park. We have to make sure that we have those two things, because those two things really are key for saving the sawfish that we have left, and keeping that core population for us that we'll need to recover the population. We're seeing a lot of research and management success with the sawfish, and more people are becoming aware that we have sawfish in our waters, that they are endangered. More people are looking out for them for us, which is great. Here's a couple Indian River Lagoon, great stories showing the success we're starting to have. Great video of 3 large sawfish, 12-foot long sawfish that Melbourne Beach, great video of them that's available on Facebook. And Night Heron Light Tackle Fishing Charter actually picked up this sawfish on their fish finder, which was just amazing. So we're great to see these reports coming out of the Indian River Lagoon system. I'm going to leave you with these fun slides of sawfish and pop culture. You may see one now in a movie or TV show now that you know what a sawfish is. They're displayed in several different TV shows. Here they're using them as weapons in the Pirates of the Caribbean display here, even in Blade Runner, Point Break, the Party House at the Beach. 2 new ones that I just got from the TV show Silicon Valley. And Desiree Collins just sent me this one, binge watching The Crown. Found these 2 Sawfish Rostra here in the background here. So if you ever see sawfish as decoration in a prop somewhere, let me know. And then the greatest movie ever filmed, my favorite movie, Jaws. Quint had 2 Sawfish Rostra in his fishing cabin, 1 of each species. Here's a large tooth Sawfish Rostrum here behind. And here is a small tooth Sawfish Rostra here behind Chief Brody. So all the work that I do is funded by grants and contracts and donations from the public. So of course I have to thank the funders, particularly now the Save Our Seas Foundation that's paying for the field work that I'm doing in Tampa Bay. Disney Wildlife Conservation Fund has been instrumental in a lot of the outreach that we're doing in Florida. And if you would like to make a tax-deductible donation, you can do that at havenworth.wedid.it. And I will leave you here with social media. I also have a monthly newsletter that I send out by email. You can go to my website and sign up for that, or my social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Facebook, I'm at Havenworth Coastal Conservation. Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Coastal Elasmos. The second ones listed here are Sawfish Recovery. That's our U.S. Sawfish Recovery team. You follow them. That's a lot of management and policy updates to the Endangered Species Act, things like that you'll find. And then here's the Sawfish Conservation Society on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, that's the one where people from around the world will post research results or sawfish sightings, historic photos, things like that. So 3 great places for you to follow to get more information about sawfish if you're interested. And here is my phone number and email if you have any questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole to facilitate the Q&A. So thanks for coming.
Okay, awesome. All right, that was fantastic, Tonya. I'm so glad you were able to share all this amazing information about the sawfish with us. I definitely learned a lot. I thought that was so cool that the baby sawfish use the red mangrove habitat so critically. I thought that was awesome. So that seems like if we restore more red mangroves in the Indian River Lagoon,
right,
the sawfish might come back.
Right. Right. Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is one of the keys. They have to have the good habitat to return to. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so we have 3 questions so far submitted to the Q&A. If we have extra time, I've got a couple of questions, but we shall see what we can get to. The first question is, since the Piney Point accident into Tampa Bay, how is water quality for these animals as well as others? Are you involved?
Yes. So I also do a lot of shark research in the Tampa Bay area, and particularly Terracea Bay and Manatee River, in collaboration with New College of Florida. And so we have been collecting water samples that we've been submitting to Tampa Bay Estuary Program to monitor the water quality. Luckily, we haven't seen any direct effects of it. We haven't seen any fish kills. We haven't seen any discolored water where we are working in particular. But there is definitely, the flume of water up by the port. And that is an area by the port, the eastern wall of Tampa Bay, where we do get a lot of sawfish encounters. So from a sawfish point of view, that was very disturbing because that shoreline is natural shoreline with red mangrove habitat. And so that was quite disturbing for us. Luckily, we haven't gotten any reports of any dead sawfish from that area, but just about 2 weeks prior to the Piney Point spill starting, a fishing guide actually videoed a large sawfish swimming right near there. So we know that sawfish hang out in that area. So it is definitely something we're monitoring. We have receivers in that area that are able to detect any sawfish and other animals that we've put transmitters in to follow them. So we're actually planning on downloading our receivers later this week and hopefully get some information, see if any animals were around there and if they left. But yeah, so it's bad. It's definitely bad. But it's not as bad as I think many of us were worried about, a month ago when it was all going on. But we are definitely monitoring and taking water samples everywhere we go to monitor the effects of it. Thankfully, it didn't happen in the summer, like during a red tide bloom. That would have made it even worse. So, I guess that's the silver lining to it. But it's something that we're definitely having to monitor and continue to be concerned about until it's resolved.
Definitely. And actually kind of going off of that, there was a question, does red tide affect sawfish?
That's a great question. And luckily we think the answer is no for red tide. So the baby sawfish are usually in very low salinity water where red tide can't survive. And so they're farther up in the rivers, farther back up in the bays, then the red tide can survive in that lower salinity water. And the adults probably move away from any red tide water. So, we had a really bad red tide a couple years ago, southwest Florida coast. And, luckily it didn't seem to affect any of our sawfish because they were either further inland from the red tide or presumably moved away from it. But great question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, I was listening and reading at the same time, and one of the classes said my students are clapping, and I realized I was like, oh, that's so nice. Right when you said red tide is a serious problem, and I'm just like, well, that's poor timing on my part. So there's been a few people have asked about volunteer opportunities around the Indian River Lagoon to assist with sawfish, as well as what is a good way to get involved working with sharks and shark research in general? So kind of like a two-part
really
question.
Good questions. Yep. So right now, of course, with COVID, I think all of the organizations are limited, unable to take volunteers right now. But on your coast, I would definitely get a hold of the guys that are over there tagging. I can go back to and find their social media information. The other thing is really to help us with the outreach. If you see somewhere that would be good for us to put a sign or a flyer or the rat cards, we want those at fishing piers, marinas. The more people that we have talking about sawfish, the more people that are going to know to look out for sawfish for us. And that's really the big thing right now, is just getting the word out to everyone over on that coast and around Indian River Lagoon that, if you see one, let us know. If you call that number or submit an email, we're immediately going to respond to that, and get that information to Matt and Jamie and Mike McAllister, so they can respond and go try to catch that sawfish and tag it for us, so that then we can track that sawfish in the Indian River Lagoon. I don't think right now they're able to take volunteers because of COVID and university protocols and all that. So, maybe next year, hopefully we'll all be totally back to normal and can do that, hopefully. But yeah, so for now, just, helping us get the word out, about sawfish. They should be released, that they, need to be protected, and helping us post materials, around different places and things like that. It's really the best thing you can do right now.
Yeah. And we're more than happy to share all the links and videos that you had shown in the presentation today. This will all be sent out to those of you who have registered online. And then eventually a lot of those links will be on our website in the coming days. It just takes a little bit of time to get our website updated. I know we're a little tight on time, but I have, well, it looks like we've had a couple of people actually specifically ask if there were more sawfish, or if there are sawfish in the northern Indian River Lagoon, in Sebastian area. A lot of people are very curious about hearing if there's more sightings of sawfish in our area.
Yep, luckily we are starting to get some more and more reports. We've even had a few, in Jacksonville, so even north of you guys, we've had some reports. And we've actually even had a couple of reports in Georgia, and a sawfish that was tagged in the Keys was actually detected on one of the receivers in Georgia. So we do know that they're passing through. Now, a lot of those reports are coming from the Atlantic, not from within the lagoon. But we are, like I said, thankfully they were able to respond to the report from just last week and tag that animal. So we are starting to get some more reports, but there hasn't been one area where we've gotten a concentration of reports from, or a certain time of year. Like, we haven't been able to flush out a pattern yet that, we always get a lot of reports in spring, or there's always a lot of reports from this fork in the river, or, anything like that. So right now it's just kind of shotgun information that we're still trying to piece together and focus in on what those pieces are trying to tell us. So right now, no pattern in it, but as we get more and more reports from people, I think that pattern is going to emerge. Matt and Mike will be able to do some more directed studies and actually go out and purposefully try to find sawfish and get some tags on some animals over there for us. So, reports are going to help us for that as well, for them to target their field surveys and help us put those dots on the map and see if we get like, oh, we're getting a lot of reports from this area, but right now we're not seeing any pattern yet. Don't have enough reports to come up with any pattern yet, but thankfully we are getting more and more reports from that area, which is great.
That's awesome. I love how you are using so much of like social media and citizen scientists for the reporting. And I like that, you know, sometimes scientists can get very caught into having these very specific protocols or only collecting this certain data or evidence. Whereas you're like, you know what, let's look at old newspaper articles. Like, let's look at postcards. Like, that's amazing. We are over on our time. There is 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What about boat strikes? Do boat strikes ever happen with sawfish?
It's rare because sawfish are usually so shallow, but we do have a couple photographs from down in the Keys of some sawfish that had marks on their back, similar to what we see with the manatees. But usually it's going to be rare because they're going to be so shallow that most boats can't go over them. But yeah, we've seen it a couple times. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that 1 meter of water is where you see them a lot. Like, that's crazy.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. The sawfish prefer the red mangroves because the red mangroves have the prop roots, which provide more protection habitat in comparison to black or white mangroves, which do not have the prop roots. So the sawfish prefer the red mangroves because they have more protective habitat.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yep. And we will, you know, down in the Everglades, 10,000 islands, we will actually see, you know, at a high tide, sawfish will go up in and amongst the prop roots. It was amazing when we learned that doing manual tracks. We're like, wait, where'd they go? They went up in the island, you know, but they'll actually go up and sit amongst those prop roots. It's fascinating to see them do that. Yeah.
That is super cool. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Our last question is, with sawfish potentially expanding back up into the Florida Peninsula, how likely is it that the critical habitat is eventually going to be expanded north as well?
That's a really good question. You know, right now the critical habitat we have designated is for nursery areas. And so, you know, the habitat has to provide some, you know, a specific function, I guess is the best way to say. You know, so again, you know, we're not drawing a box around a map and saying this area is critical habitat. It's the features within that area, that habitat that we're protecting. So, so yes, for example, if we did find a nursery area in Indian River Lagoon, if there's an area where, you know, a mother's giving birth every other year and we find pups there every other year, or if we find where they mate, we don't know where they mate yet. You know, let's say, for example, that was happening in Indian River Lagoon. There's somewhere where, you know, all the sawfish are going to mate every year, and we would definitely want to protect that habitat and you know, figure out what it is about that area that makes it so special for us to protect. But yes, it's very possible that, you know, as animals are getting into Tampa Bay, in Indian River Lagoon again, that we may have to revisit the areas that we have designated for juveniles if we find more nursery areas, or for adults if we find those mating areas or feeding areas or resting areas, migration corridors, things like that.
That's amazing. Yeah, because you know, we don't know if they are localized animals or if they do travel around, or if you get like one crazy one that's like, I'm gonna go all the way up to New York. I like cooler water.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tonya. That was a fantastic webinar. We've had a lot of really great feedback. I'll get those links to all your great resources, the social media links, newsletter links, and those, if you wouldn't mind, I'd be happy to share those videos that you had shown us as well. And for the participants, the recording will be up on YouTube later this afternoon, and you will receive an email link with that as well. And all this information will also be compiled on our website so that those links are always there for people to view.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nicole. This was wonderful.
I had a great time. Thank you so much. And also thank you so much for your phenomenal swag. I love the pamphlets. I've been passing them out at all of our tabling and outreach events.
Well, if you ever run out and need more, let me know.
Will do. All right. Take care. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.